I now have the pleasure of welcoming Dr. Stefan Schröder, who is partner at Freshfields in Düsseldorf, as well as Dr. Hendrik Wessling, who is the principal associate at Freshfields, also in Düsseldorf. They will be jointly presenting on the title of the presentation will be Developing Germany's Transmission Grid Infrastructure Between Regulated Return on Equity and Public Interest, a Race for Investment and Fair Prices. You somehow brought everything in the title of your presentation, and let us see how the German approach finds an equilibrium as regards all these significant issues. Sie haben das Wort, mein Herr.
Yeah, thank you very much, Professor Metaxas. And yeah, indeed, when you look on the title of our presentation, you realize very quickly that this is a topic we could probably spend an entire conference on with several sub-presentations. But we only have 15 minutes. So what we will do in this 15 minutes is breaking it all a bit down with a particular focus on the development of the hydrogen grid infrastructure, which is currently ongoing in Germany. Yeah, looking on how the German regulatory regime aims to tackle these issues, in particular when it comes to amortization risks and yeah, incentivizing investors to make these investments urgently needed into the network infrastructure. Having said this, handing over to you, Hendrik, for the first slides.
Yeah, thank you, Stefan. So before we go into the details, we would like to give an overview on general risks you're facing when developing a hydrogen grid. So not specifically only in Germany, but also if you would develop it in another country. So first of all, developing a hydrogen grid involves a high initial capex. You have to repurpose natural gas pipelines, but you also have to build new pipelines, and this, yeah, causes some capex. You have also cost uncertainty because there is volatility in raw material cost. You have risks of delay. There's also a risk that resources that you need are constrained because also other sectors need the same resources. And then furthermore, I mean, your entire business model actually depends on subsidies, and subsidies, at least in Germany and the European Union, are often pretty complex and involve uncertainties also. So that are general challenges you face. I would say they are not specific to a hydrogen grid. They also apply if you develop um, other infrastructure in the energy space. However, a particular risk we have here is this amortization risk. So the success of developing a hydrogen core grid or a hydrogen grid as such depends on the success of the hydrogen ramp up. And different than in the natural gas world or also in the electricity world, your customer base is limited to certain anchor customers. So mostly companies that are producing steel, that are producing chemicals, power plant operators. These are the main players in this market, and the ramp up of the hydrogen economy will only succeed if these players have sufficient demand. And they are facing a bunch of different challenges. So first of all, the technological challenge. I mean, hydrogen is one option, but depending on which subsector you look at, electrification could also work, direct electrification. CCUS could be an option, biomethane could be an option, or another option could also be that the legislator does not implement the incentives that are necessary to make hydrogen bankable. For example, that it intervenes into the EU ETS price, that certain quota requirements are not coming, and so there is a risk that in the end hydrogen is not consumed to an extent that is necessary to utilize this grid. Obviously, there are also other scenarios that are applicable, but it is simply uncertain. And then in the end, you also have this competitive risks that carbon leakage could occur, or that simply production conditions in other countries are cheaper. And so it's not a guarantee that the hydrogen ramp up works. And so what do you do normally if you invest into infrastructure, but you're not certain whether the infrastructure will be utilized? You will require a risk premium, and actually you would like to have then higher network tariffs. However, if you increase network tariffs, then obviously the anchor customers have to pay more, and their competitiveness would be under threat. So to sum it up, if you would develop a hydrogen grid in the current environment under free market conditions, I think we would see this would be pretty difficult to succeed. And this is why you need certain regulation that reduces the risks and makes the development of hydrogen grids bankable. And so with these initial thoughts, I'm handing back to Stefan. Oh,
Yeah,
actually, no, sorry. We said I also going to do the slide. Sorry, confused that. So the solution of the German government is a core grid, and the core grid should be completed by 2032. And on this slide before, you can see how the core grid could look like. So it actually shows that there are certain spots where where the core grid will go to. So just a short overview on what the core grid is. It's a combination of different hydrogen projects which are operating under specific regulatory and funding conditions. These projects are assigned to responsible parties. Most of them are TSOs, some are DSOs. This core grid concept has been approved by the Federal Network Agency in October 2024, and it potentially consists of 9,040 kilometers with an entry capacity of 1.1 gigawatt and an exit capacity of 87 gigawatt. So now I'm handing back to Stefan.
Yeah, thank you, Hendrik. Yeah, and now after having seen what are the challenges and how far we are already on the hydrogen core grid planning, let's now look on the measures which, as Hendrik mentioned, are urgently required to incentivize investments, and let's see how this has been figured out for Germany and the German market. So first, this hydrogen grid we saw on the previous slides was based on a planning which was significantly done by the German natural gas transmission system operators, and it then had to be approved by the Federal Network Agency. And within this application, for each of the projects, a so-called project responsible party was to be determined, which, and that is a very important key element, upon approval of the application for the hydrogen core network, are now really legally required to realize these projects, unless there's any change in circumstances. But generally, they cannot say, yeah, no, we don't want to take this final investment decision. So it's kind of taken already with the application being filed for the hydrogen core grid, and then the confirmation of this. And then how is the amortization risk tackled? I mean, first, the regulatory regime for the hydrogen core grid will still be based on a cost-based regulation, as we know it from other energy networks. So you basically look what is the cost base for the infrastructure, and then on that basis you determine the allowed revenues for the particular hydrogen core grid operator. These prices then, which are ultimately need to be paid by the shippers, can be reduced by support payments, in particular under IPCEI. But let's forget this for the moment and say, okay, and this goes back to what Hendrik said on one of the first slides. If you would apply a pure cost plus regulation, in particular in a market with rather few network users, you would end up with prohibitive high prices, and it would not even be able to have a successful market ramp up. So what the German regime contains is basically a two-phase approach. So in a first phase, the actual transportation costs will not be based on a pure cost plus basis, but will be determined as a price which will work to achieve a successful market ramp up. And Hendrik will tell us a bit more about this price on the next slide. And then clearly, if you don't charge a price which is based on actual costs, but a price which is below costs, you then at the end of the day have a gap on your bank account. And this gap now here is not on your bank account, but on the so-called amortization account, which is an account which has been established then by law and by the German government and their ideas. And then in the second phase, the idea is to charge prices to the customers which are actually above the level which would be needed on a cost-based prices, so that this gap can then be closed in the second phase, so that at the end of the day, the amortization account, ideally in the year 2055, is back to zero. However, to tackle the amortization risk, this is combined with a state guarantee, so that if a financial deficit on the amortization account in 2055, then the German state will cover this, with the exemption that a share of 24% is to be borne by the hydrogen core grid operators, and it's shared between them on a pro rata basis. So the amortization risk is very much limited by this instrument, which was a very important step for the investors to at all decide filing the application for the hydrogen core grid. Having said this, I'm gonna move to the next slide. Hendrik will tell you a bit about how these actually charge prices are calculated.
Yeah. So the Energy Industry Act provides that the Bundesnetzagentur has to set up has to stipulate a ramp-up tariff, and there are two principles that have to be considered. So first of all, obviously, the ramp-up tariff should allow to balance this amortization account by 2055. On the other hand, it should also stimulate demand for transport capacity, or at least refrain from discouraging demand for transport capacity, and specifically then refrain from prohibitively high prices in the initial phase. So the Federal Network Agency says interprets that in the following way. They're saying, on the one hand, we need as the Industry Act says, we need a tariff that allows amortization by 2055. On the other hand, this tariff should always be stable. It should actually always be the same, subject to inflationary adjustments. And based on these principles, BNetzA decided that this tariff for firm annual capacity will amount to 25 euros per kilowatt hour per year. For the intra-year capacity products, the Federal Network Agency will specify the price in its Wakanda decision. Now I'm handing back to Stefan.
Yeah, and then because we are also already running out of time, let's just spend a few words on this last slide here. Because we now spoke a lot about the amortization risk and how this is tackled, and that it's quite fairly tackled by the regulatory regime. But clearly, there's a second very important element. It's not only will I get my money back that I've invested, but also will I receive an adequate return on investment on my capital which I have invested. And you see this big red question mark here. This is still one topic where, in our view, the German government and the German legislator needs to find a solution for. There's some initial price level in the laws, but they are only very holistic rules on how this is to be determined in the future. And this still brings a lot of uncertainty into the market, and it has also led to a situation where, at the end of the day, not all projects in the hydrogen core grid application had project responsible parties, but it's in particular for some projects with a starting point in a few years, we not yet have commitments from entities which are willing to realize these projects and giving a binding commitment. So this is still an open question which needs to be brought to a solution by the German state and the German government. And I think then we are right on time at the end of our presentation.
You're indeed on time, and it was indeed very insightful. I can remember I was 3 years ago. I was asked to chair a conference session here in Greece about the prospects of the hydrogen market, and there were I wouldn't like to exaggerate, but there were hundreds of people in the audience, and at least here in Greece, I have the impression that this hydrogen enthusiasm has somehow weakened. So it's important also to get this input from Germany, who is that can be regarded somehow as a pioneer of the hydrogen market in this common European energy landscape, and see the challenges and the problems, but also the suggested solutions that you have presented and the approach of the Bundesnetzagentur. So it was indeed very interesting. I would like to kindly ask you to stay for perhaps a very short conversation afterwards. We're really on time, and I'm planning to be strict on that, so I don't somehow ask you to delay other activities that you have during the day. Again, thank you very much, both of you, for this very interesting presentation.